There are over 200 countries in the world. With so many countries out there, it would stand to reason that if you were visiting the United States that you might have no problem getting a US visa. But did you know that there are actually a number of countries whose citizens are completely barred from entering the US? And the tech behind these bans is fascinating. Hi, it's me. This is my channel. And today we're answering the extraordinary question: are you banned from entering the United States? Now, if you've been trying to visit the United States for any reason and keep getting rejected, don't blame yourself. There is a good chance you could be one of the people who fall under one of these 8 country bans. To understand why some people are barred from entering the US, let's first talk about visas. If you want to visit the US for business or pleasure, you need to get what's called a non-immigrant visa. Most of these visas are pretty easy to obtain, but to qualify you must prove that you have ties to your home country. Basically, you must convince an immigration officer that you will leave the US once your visit is finished. You also need to pay a small fee, which can vary based on the type of visa you are applying for. For example, a B1 visa, which is reserved for those traveling to the US for business, costs $46, while a B2 visa, which covers those coming for medical treatment or vacation, costs $70. But if you plan on staying longer than 90 days or are planning to work in the United States, you need to apply for a different kind of visa altogether. This is called an immigrant visa and is much more difficult to obtain. Not only do you have to go through a lengthy interview process, you also have to pay an application fee that starts at $285. But regardless of whether you're obtaining an immigrant or non-immigrant visa, if you're coming from one of these 8 countries, you won't be granted one. Let's start with Iraq, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, and North Korea. These countries are all part of what's called the I-category ban, which bars citizens from these countries from obtaining any sort of US visa. The good news is that this ban does not apply to green card holders or US citizens. So if you're from one of these countries but happen to marry a US citizen, you'll be able to enter the country without a visa. But beyond that, it's unclear why these countries were specifically chosen. One theory is that they were targeted because their governments sponsor terrorist activities. However, the US government hasn't confirmed this. The second country on our list is Venezuela, and its citizens are barred from entering the US unless they were immediate relatives of a US citizen or permanent resident. On top of that, since January 2021, they've had to apply for a national security waiver as well. In June of 2021, the U.S. State Department announced that this additional waiver was required due to ongoing civil unrest in the country. The unrest in question refers to the disputed presidential election held in May 2018. The incumbent president, Nicolas Maduro, was declared the winner of the vote, but his opposition, Juan Guaido, claimed he was the true president of Venezuela. Since then, the two have been in a standoff with each other, resulting in hundreds of deaths and thousands of arrests. Because of this political turmoil, the U.S. has taken a hard stance against Venezuela, even though it doesn't quite match the stance they've taken against the other I-banned countries. But as far as why exactly the U.S. has banned Venezuelan citizens, we may never know for sure. Although the State Department has said that the ban is in place to protect U.S. national security and foreign policy interest, critics say the ban is nothing more than a way to punish ordinary citizens for the actions of their government. Even more critics have pointed out that by targeting immediate relatives of U.S. citizens and permanent residents, the ban has torn families apart. So now you know why 7 countries plus Venezuela are barred from entering the United States. But what about the people in those countries? Well, just because you're from one of these countries doesn't mean you're banned from entering the U.S. There are plenty of people from these countries who travel to the U.S. every year for business or leisure. However, they probably had to jump through some extra hoops to make it happen. If you're a journalist, researcher, or religious worker, you can apply for an R, S, or A visa respectively. But the catch is that you need to be sponsored by an organization in the United States. Fortunately, There are organizations that help people from these countries obtain the proper documentation needed to travel to the United States. For example, the International Research and Exchanges Board helps journalists and scholars from these countries receive visas through their various visa exchange programs. As long as you're affiliated with one of these programs, you shouldn't have too much trouble getting into the US. But what about all the people who aren't part of these special programs? Well, the US government hasn't made things easy for them. Not only does this group have to contend with the same visa requirements as everyone else, they also have to deal with additional scrutiny during the visa interview. They'll need to show clear ties back to their home country and prove that their trip to the US isn't motivated by immigration. Additionally, depending on their home country, they may have to submit to additional background checks, provide DNA samples, and even be fingerprinted. But despite all of these hurdles, it is possible to get a visa. In fact, a visa applicant from one of these 7 countries has a better chance of getting approved than one from any other country. Why? Because applicants from these countries have something to prove. They have to prove to the immigration officer that they don't intend to commit immigration fraud or commit a terrorist attack. If they can do that, the odds are in their favor. But that doesn't mean it's been easy. Over the past few years, people from these countries have had to contend with long visa interview questions, increased requests for additional documentation, and even outright denials of their visas. In some cases, people have been denied visas without being given a clear reason why. This has caused a lot of anxiety and uncertainty for people from these countries who are planning to travel to the US for business or leisure. The good news is that the US government has recently announced changes to the visa process. That should make it easier for people from these countries to travel to the US. The changes include shorter visa interviews, more lenient requirements for additional documentation, and a faster turnaround time for visa applications. In addition to these changes, the US government has also said that they will be more transparent about the visa process and will provide applicants with clear reasons if their visa is denied. While these changes are unlikely to completely eliminate the challenges that people from these countries face when applying for visas, they should make the process less stressful and more accessible. Now, we haven't talked yet about one of the biggest reasons why someone might be banned from the US, and that is criminal history. It is pretty common for people who have been convicted of serious crimes to be banned from entering the United States. This is especially true for those convicted of drug trafficking, firearms offenses, and sex crimes. But even those convicted of less serious crimes like theft or assault can be banned if the crimes involved moral turpitude. Basically, if the crime was considered to be particularly heinous, even if it wasn't technically a felony, you're likely to be banned from entering the United States. Fortunately, it's possible to have a ban like this lifted, but you'll have to wait 10 years after your release from prison before you can even apply to have your ban lifted. That's a long time to wait, and it's not guaranteed to happen. But there are a few exceptions to this rule. If you can demonstrate that you've made significant contributions to society since your conviction, such as starting a successful business or volunteering for a nonprofit, you may be able to have your ban lifted sooner. Similarly, if you have close family in the United States, such as a spouse or child, you may also be able to get your ban lifted sooner by demonstrating the strong ties you have to this country. But ultimately, it is up to the discretion of the US government whether or not to lift a ban for people with criminal records, and there's no guarantee that it will happen. Now, before we go, here's your reminder to like this video. If you've learned something new today, subscribe if you're interested in topics like this, and hit the bell icon to stay notified about future videos. Thank you for watching. See you next time.